What if John Kerry won the 2004 election? There are many problems with Kerry's 2004 campaign which we can change to make Kerry win in 2004 against George W. Bush. Kerry made his decorated Vietnam experience prominent as he discussed foreign affairs, which is not a problem except for the fact that it opened attacks on him from groups like SBVT, and Kerry was slow to respond in defending his record. These attacks had a significant impact on Kerry's campaign, with the group's attacks remaining prominent throughout the 2000s, and added the term swift boating to political jargon. Additionally, Democrats had preferred for Kerry to focus on domestic issues as he was beating Bush there and because Bush was viewed as stronger for national security and foreign affairs. But foreign policy was going to be a big issue in 2004 regardless, and it's better to tackle it early. Kerry would just need to address SVBT allegations early on and not over-respond to the Killian documents on Bush. Another change we can make is if Kerry chooses Wesley Clark as his running mate instead of the butt-kissing wuss John Edwards. Wesley Clark was a retired U.S. Army general who was Supreme Allied Commander during the Clinton administration and had also run for president in 2004. Clark's campaign saw him as a promising candidate as an anti-war general, creating enthusiasm for his candidacy and excited the part of the Democratic Party that was more conservative. However, Clark would not meet expectations in the polls when compared to other candidates like Howard Dean. Despite this issue, Clark would bounce back with well-articulated policy plans, but this came too late as Kerry was the clear nominee for the Democratic Party, and he would suspend his campaign. Clark had brought appeal from conservative Democrats, anti-Bush, and liberal Republicans, as well as independents, all voter groups which Kerry would need to better appeal to in order to win the election. Wesley Clark would also double down on Kerry's foreign policy positions, effectively stopping any bleeding from groups like SVBT. Max Cleland is another very strong potential vice presidential choice who would boost Kerry's foreign policy affairs and Iraq positions. Cleland was a triple amputee Vietnam veteran, but I figure that Clark is a more realistic choice since he had run for president in 2004 and was on Kerry's shortlist to be VP in our timeline. Now, Clark was not the perfect candidate for vice president due to the incident at Pristina Airport, a political attack which Cheney would not hold back on in the debates. Clark would also not excite the liberal base on social issues, but would allow him to gain support from social conservatives who were economically liberal. In the debate, Clark could easily frame the attack by Cheney as Cheney not supporting a strong response against America's enemies. Other than that, I honestly think Clark could debate the living crap out of Cheney. Furthermore, he could point out some of the discrepancies of the Bush administration which made him become a Democrat in the first place, notably how Bush had campaigned on non-interventionist foreign policy and had been against Clinton's intervention in Yugoslavia. Clark has the ability to absolutely destroy Cheney, and in addition to Kerry defeating Bush, this puts Democrats in a better position to win the election. So Kerry has won the election and claimed Ohio. Congratulations! Now there's a lot to deal with. Kerry would replace Rumsfeld as Secretary of Defense, possibly with former Senator Max Cleland, or move Colin Powell from Secretary of State to Secretary of Defense. Former 2000 vice presidential candidate and 2004 presidential candidate Senator Joe Lieberman could take the position of National Security Advisor. Other civilian neocons in the Defense Department would be immediately replaced. Once in office, Kerry would inherit Iraq as the Civil War is about to start. It's very unlikely that Kerry would enact the surge in 2000 to handle the sectarian violence as in our timeline. Most Democrats had voted against the surge and were in favor of continuing troop decreases or a full withdrawal. The U.S. would have a less stable pullout of Iraq, and a weaker Iraq would exist for an earlier ISIS uprising, maybe in 2011 if Kerry abandons the timeline and does not accept the awakening. But it's unlikely that he would fully abandon it in his term from January 2005 to 2009. A full-on Iraqi civil war destroys the country in 2006 as it did in our timeline, but Kerry might cave to Democrat demands for full withdrawal, which would ensure that Iraq remains a failed state for the foreseeable future into the present day, like Syria and Libya, with a dose of Rwanda and Yugoslavia genocides. If this did happen, Kerry would blame the Bush administration and neocons. Meanwhile, the Republicans blamed Kerry and the neoliberals for abandoning Iraq and making it a failed state as a civil war started after Kerry came into office, and compared the insurgency during Bush's terms to what happened during Kerry's term. Republicans would be split between maintain the failing course and surge thoughts on how Iraq could have been won. The idea of reconciliation would also not exist in America's counterinsurgency toolbox without the awakening. Republicans could fully embrace the ideology of neoconservatism as the alternative to Kerry's failed withdrawal, or fall into political chaos since Kerry had defeated the sitting neocon president, and look for a new basis for the party to slack its ideology to. Neoconservatism in our timeline can be broken down between idealistic pragmatists versus existing Wilsonian neocons and those who favored an aggressive policy as a means of expanding American influence. In this timeline, all factions would see a civil war in the party as Bush was a Wilsonian idealist with delusions, and each neocon group would immediately see issues in Kerry's policies to take advantage of. Republicans would also see an earlier Tea Party movement, a rise in isolationists, and some Trumpists and general hawks. If Kerry decides to stay in Iraq, the situation is still probably very unstable. Kerry may not enact the surge to decrease terrorism and insurgencies in Iraq. He would still follow Sanchez and Casey's status quo strategy, and it causes the U.S. to remain in a losing war and likely sees a full collapse in 2011. But that's for the next administration to repair. U.S. reputation is low for breaking and not fixing Iraq, but global opinion wanted America out of Iraq while not seeing why the surge was good and would help Iraq out. Kerry was also viewed as a favorite by the UN of the 2004 election, and they would probably be a bit more open to his policies regarding Iraq. I still don't think Kerry would enact the surge, as it would be seen as political suicide for him with the 2008 election so close. Regarding Afghanistan, there would be more U.S. working with NATO allies against the Taliban, but honestly not a lot changes. Domestically, the Kerry administration favors some more socially liberal policies and tries to put forth more healthcare reforms. He would also respond better to Katrina with federal support, and he would use it as an example for why the U.S. needs to support efforts to combat climate change. Then there's the housing market crash. It's argued how much the Bush tax cuts affected the market, but it was going to collapse anyway with the way it was set up under the Clinton administration. Kerry would still blame the Bush administration for the crash, but voters would want to see short-term solutions when an election arrives. He would be a one-term president due to Iraq's collapse, many partisan attacks, and more. But the U.S. economy taking a massive downturn during the housing market crash is enough for a very likely Republican victory in 2008. The question is, which Republican succeeds Kerry? John McCain would represent the pragmatic and idealistic neocon foreign policy-wise, and domestically for moderate social policies and advocate for campaign reforms. Ron Paul would represent the earlier isolationists and Tea Party Republicans, which would have gained support as a result of Kerry's failed Iraq policies and conservative voters wanting to be done with all of it, as well as fiscal conservatives in the ongoing recession. Jeb is also an obvious choice since he is the son of a former president and brother of a former president. Jeb would also be popular as the governor of Florida for 2 terms and appeal to conservatives and W fans. W, however, could come back, supported by Wilsonian neocons, and use the power of nostalgia for how much better things were before Kerry came in office, exploiting Kerry's missteps in Iraq as well as perceived for causing the civil war through mismanagement of the war as well as the ongoing recession. There'd just be no chance at Cheney having a shot at becoming the president in 2008. There just wouldn't be. Nobody likes him. Honestly, any one of these 4 potential candidates could defeat Kerry. Bush could be nominated again, but I'm not sure he would want to run again. But hey, you never know. There could be a 2008 rematch between Bush and Kerry. Ron Paul would be more significant in this alternate 2008 than he was in our 2008 presidential election, and could have about as much support as he did in our 2012. Paul has the isolationist, populist, and libertarian vote, but he would alienate the much more significant establishment Republican voters. He still wouldn't be nominated in 2008, but would likely have more momentum for his 2012 campaign. McCain seems like the obvious choice as he was nominated in our timeline, and America is facing a complete disaster in this alternate Iraq war. Paul and McCain would likely spar a lot before McCain wins the nomination, and it would result in Paul not endorsing McCain and endorsing or becoming the Libertarian candidate. But McCain would win in 2008 in my view. 2012 would see McCain and Paul spar again, while Democrats likely nominate Barack Obama. The details of McCain's alternate 2008 campaign and administration would have too many moving pieces to analyze and put into this already very long video. As a side note, I had another alternate scenario where Kerry wins the 2004 election, in which I wanted to include in this video where Kerry followed through with his idea to choose John McCain as his vice president, but this video is already very long. Write in the comments if you would like to see this as another scenario. But I think everyone knows that if Kerry had won in 2004, Bush comes back in 2008 and everyone hails the great W for 4 more years, then elects the man, the myth, the great Jeb for 2 terms. If anyone challenges the great Jebediah for a 3rd term, then W will be back in 2020 for his 3rd term. Just kidding. What do you think would have happened if John Kerry had won the 2004 election? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching.